Okay, I think we can start now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Kang. I am a Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Art History Leadership here at the Cleveland Museum of Art and at Case Western University. Welcome to the second panel of this afternoon. And the panel is titled, Who Makes Public Memory? So as we have sort of continued our conversations about monuments and spaces, I think we're now sort of slightly shifting our focus to people, their agencies, their actions, their words, as well as their stories. So we'll actually get to talk about that with three very sort of exciting guests that we have here today. So just immediately to my left is Kathleen, or Kathy Barrie, who is the director and curator of the Putnam collection at Case Western Reserve University, and also the principal of Barrie Projects. And we have Julie Reilly, welcome Julie, who is the executive director of the Intermuseum Conservation Association, Art Conservation here in Cleveland. And lastly, we have Julian Rogers. I'm very excited to have him here, who is the executive director of local government and community relations at Case Western Reserve University. So I would like to actually ask all three of you to take turns to introduce yourselves and your work, and then I think we can actually then start our conversation from there. So Kathy, why don't you actually start?
Thank you. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here to talk about one of my very most favorite topics, which is public history related to public art, related to monuments. I've had a long career in various parts of this topic, and so my biggest problem today was winnowing it down to talk about just a few things that are near and dear to me. Public memory, public history, how we commemorate people, how we come together to make those decisions to do so is such an interesting and multi-layered experience. I want to start with a couple museum projects that we were responsible for that were sort of in the category of, well, you can't make a museum about that. You can't make a museum about about spying. And the way that one gets to the people who are going to make a museum about spying is to find the people who know what they're talking about, the experts in the field, to find the community that's interested, and above all, to find the people who are passionate about the topic. There was no shortage of that with the International Spy Museum. It was hard to go to undercover agents and counterintelligence agents, but we got some retired ones, and we're able to put together a museum in Washington that addressed so many aspects of the world of intelligence gathering. The second one that we did that was similar was in Las Vegas, of all places, the Mob Museum. This is the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement. And if I tell you, well, how do you sort out who the spies are? How do you sort out who the mobsters were? And I think there was the same expert group. There were the same people from both reputed crime families and law enforcement, and all the people that aim their strategies at that. So how do you winnow down who all those people were? That was another task. The last big one was the United States Olympic and Paralympic Museum. And this was beyond daunting because it's only about our American athletes, our US athletes. And between the Olympians and the Paralympians from our country, we have won over 5,000 medals. You know, we kind of excel at this. And one thing that was very important to us was going beyond who the typical people might be, the NBC people. And whenever I give a talk about anything, I usually figure out a way to show LeBron. So here he is. He I think what it just meant was that people are so used to seeing the NBC version of the Olympics and Paralympics that we wanted to go much further with this. And I think in any good museum, as in any good monument, as in any good temporary public art that's commemorating stuff, you really want to make the topic accessible to people, and you want to surprise them. You really want them to find out something that they didn't know. And you also want them to find themselves within the museum. So in this case, this museum early on was named after the Olympians and the Paralympians. And I think that was the very surprising thing for our audience that's come to the museum. This actually is the most accessible museum in the United States in terms of its physical layout by Diller, Scavidio, and Renfro, down to as equal a balance as we could possibly get between the Olympics and the Paralympics. So that was truly thrilling. Here, closer to home, we were privileged to work with the Western Reserve Historical Society on an exhibit, their beginning exhibit called Cleveland Starts Here. Well, this is great fun. The commute was much less, and the richness of this community and what, I think you've heard it from Betsy through everybody who's new to this community, is that once you're here, you come to love it. It really, all its special features become manifest, and that was definitely the case here. And how marvelous, this is an unabashed plug for Cleveland Starts Here at the Western Reserve Historical Society for any further consideration of going to think about monuments in Cleveland, people who have been recognized properly, people who have been ignored. No offense, there are too many men. We've got to find a way to get more women in all of these places. But it was really a thrill. And we broadened, I think, by going into the contemporary, by going into all the groups that make up this rich pot of Cleveland and presenting something that if you walk in there, you should be able to see something of yourself. And that is so important. I started back in this business as a member of something called the Committee for Public Art in the Warehouse District, a very pithy name. No one has taken it up again. But our purpose was, as West 6th and the Warehouse District of Cleveland was being redeveloped, we wanted to make sure that it was redeveloped in an authentic way, that it included from the beginning the artists who were moving back into that community, and that we could appreciate the layers of history that were there right under our feet, things that people walked over and by every day. And what a hunt it was. We had a collaborative team that involved historians from Case Western Reserve, the Natural History Museum, the Western Reserve Historical Society, such a rich conglomeration of people with different experience. And we start out looking at maps, so you can imagine how happy I was to look at the front of the program today and see the map of Cleveland. So this is a very early map of Cleveland. To the lower right, you can see Public Square. You can see the streets just as they were. You can see the hash lines of the hill that goes down into the flats. And then on a later map, look carefully, in the upper, well, if you can see the edge of the shoreline, and you can see Bath Street, right below it, maybe you can see it, says Lighthouse. So that was interesting to us. What is the lighthouse doing there on this map? And again, you can see all the grid of the city, which is wonderful. Gravity Place down in the lower left. All these streets pretty much still exist, added by some other ones. But one of the things that we loved was finding the old stereopticon views of the lighthouse that was that lighthouse several blocks in. And you can see the lighthouse on the right, and to the left, the steps to the lighthouse that you can see, they're still there. And if you walk around downtown or the Warehouse District and you come upon these steps, it's like fairly remarkable that this one little vestige of where the shoreline was, how important commerce and shipping was so essential. What we did was a project that I dearly love. It was called The Hidden City Revealed. And again, with urban archaeologists and archaeologists, we went, and historians, we walked through maybe 25 sites in the city, which if you knew where you were looking at something, just opened up huge horizons about what you might think about the city and things you might want to explore. It was just a marvelous project. Oops, I need to go back one. Can I do it? Yep, oh, thank you. This map, which is hard to read, we should blow up and give to everyone here. This kind of blueprint hangs in the offices of University Circle, Inc. At the bottom, you can see it's a map of Doan's quarters, essentially University Circle. And it was as this area was remembered in the 1890s. And the museum is not there yet. You can see the lagoon kind of right in the center, the oddly natural shaped space. And you can see Adelbert College is there. You can see the Case School of Engineering is there. You can even see their respective playing fields if you just go further past the main buildings. You can see the Ford home, which was the stop on the Underground Railroad that was mentioned earlier. You can see, if you look closely, a Ferris wheel. You can see Fairmount Junior High, where Jesse Owens went to high school and started his track career. You can see a sign pointing to the bobsled hill up on Edge Hill, and numerous other things that I think are so rich for us to go back and look at something of this era, of what was here before things that are here now. I am lucky now to be the curator and director of the Putnam collection. And we have monuments on campus, including this first one of the poet Hart Crane, which is located outside the library. You know, his family lived in this area. He began his career here. His father, Mr. Crane, was part of Crane's Candy, and they developed the Lifesaver. What a marvelous thing to think about. On the other end of the spectrum, a woman's hand. This is Judy's Hand Pavilion. It was done by the artist Tony Tassett as part of Front, a collaboration that we did with them. I love that it's a woman's hand. You kind of have to read the label to know it. And it's even better when you know that Judy is a renowned painter and artist. And what a lovely tribute that her husband made, that he picked her hand to be the hand that protects us as the pavilion. The darling child is my granddaughter. One of the most important things on campus is Philip Johnson's Turning Point sculpture. As most of you know, it was originally located where the Tink is now. It had to be moved. We just could barely consider where it might go because it's so big. And it really needed to be in the same situation as when it was first conceptualized by Philip. And that was on paths that marked the merging and the turning point for this university as it grew from its confederated institutions to the great university that it is today. So how marvelous that this piece could be done, and you'll hear more about that in a minute, since Julie is here representing those who restored it. Let's see, one more. One of the last monuments that's gone in is a piece that we were so lucky to be given by the estate of Peter Putnam, who funded our fund. He funded our fund. And this piece by George Siegel, as you know, George Siegel has another work here in the Cleveland Museum of Art, is cast in bronze. It is of two homeless figures with a kind of rucksack between them, and it was offered to the university. So how could you ever turn down a George Siegel? We couldn't, and it didn't take long to figure out what a marvelous convergence this piece of sculpture was with this school, and especially the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. And if you look carefully at the installation, it was like Siegel knew there was a window there. If you were going to take shelter and needed to take shelter outside of public space, this is where you would do it. So it has so enriched anybody walking by that goes to look at it, but anyone entering that building and understanding its mission. The currently on the books for us, and something that we really want to do as part of this monument process is to do a new banner on the Triangle building, which overlooks Mocha and Toby's Plaza, by Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass was, and this speech that he gave as a commencement speech at the university in 1854, one sentence from this speech really captures what the essence of his talk was. And it is this: the relation subsisting between the white and black people of this country is the vital question of this age. And he said that in 1854.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm Julie Reilly. I'm an objects conservator, but I came to conservation not through art history, but through anthropology. So early in my career, I worked at the Smithsonian, I worked at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation and the Winterthur Museum outside of Philadelphia, and was the founding director of a regional conservation center in Omaha, Nebraska. I worked for the artist June Kaneko for a while, and worked a few other places before coming to ICA about 4 years ago. And I'm the executive director at ICA. ICA is one of 5 regional conservation centers in the United States. We're all nonprofits, and we exist to serve all of those people who can't afford to have their own conservation labs, including private individuals like yourselves. ICA is 70 years old this coming March, I think, and we've been serving the greater Cleveland area for all of those 70 years. We do objects conservation, paintings conservation, textiles, paper conservation, and we have an active education program as well. But in our work, we have worked with over 3,000 community organizations and collection stewards in the region. Whoops, I guess I could show you my first slide. Did I push it hard? Yeah. There we go. And in that time, ICA has been honored to work on some of Cleveland's and Ohio's amazing monuments, including the War Memorial that you see here by Marshall Fredericks. We worked on this in 2008 to stabilize it. I am told, though, I was recently learned that unfortunately, right before the RNC, it was painted green. So it was stripped and painted green, not by us. And then you also see the Mammoth and Mastodon figures by Cleveland's Victor Schreckengast. They were made in 1956 and were originally at the Pachyderm House at the zoo. And when that building was torn down, they went into storage for many years. And ICA was thrilled to be able to help bring them out of storage and install them again in an absolutely perfect public location. And then Kathy mentioned Turning Point is another monument in Cleveland that we were thrilled to work with. The sculpture was commissioned by Case, which is not often the case, which is wonderful. It was installed and then removed from its original site and installed in a new location in 2001. And then it was removed again in 2013, stored for 6 more years then, and we were able to conserve and reinstall it in 2019, working closely with Kathy and everyone else at Case. So this is an example of a monument that has not stayed in the same place. And I believe that as it was deinstalled and moved and reinstalled, that its meaning changed from each of those locations. And I concur that this is the perfect place for it. Its meaning and location match perfectly here. You can just barely see part of the, is it the School of Business behind the sculpture, which was designed by one of Philip Johnson's students. So there's a connection there and a continuity there that's wonderful. Some people have issues with Philip Johnson as a person, and I'm sure the students at the university share a range of meanings about this monument. an installation, which got me thinking about my own personal connections with monuments. So I actually grew up overseas. My father worked for the State Department. And I noticed that many of the monuments that I remember from my childhood were related to dynastic rule or religion, two monument types that we rarely see in the US. And I remember all of the Korean people who I would talk to or who would tell me about these dynastic tombs were quite respectful and honored their heritage. And they have relationships with these monuments from long past dynasties, and they recognize both the ills of those dynasties and the accomplishments of those regimes, without any strong sense that they relate directly to their present lives. And maybe because of the disassociation, or maybe just because of the length of time that had passed. So on the one side, you see a picture of the tombs of the Chosun dynasty from 1966, and me and my best friend when I was a little kid sitting on one of the monuments. And this piece is part of a cluster of monuments that were installed between 1392 and 1910, and this particular one was built in 1400. 20% of the countries in the world actually have national religions, and even some that don't, like Thailand, have majority populations that espouse one religion. So you'll see many national religious monuments that are embraced by the public there. And this slide is from 1971. It's Wat Po in Bangkok. Its origin date is unknown, but it was first rebuilt in 1788. So then there are monuments in very, very, very remote locations where 99.999% of the people on our planet don't even know that they exist, even the people in their own country, until something unimaginable happens. And then all of a sudden, we all know about the monument. This is a snapshot from Bamiyan, Afghanistan in 1974. My family and I were living in Kabul, and this is where we went on our family summer vacation in the summer of 1974. So I think this monument means something very different to me than it means to the world at large today, and certainly that it means to the Taliban, and certainly different than what it means to Buddhists all over the world, and even what it means to non-Taliban Afghans. So this is a picture I said from 1974 of the Buddha that was installed in 618 AD. So shifting back to Cleveland monuments, I've noticed that almost every one of us have included the free stamp as an example. I just wanted you to see some images of the free stamp when it was being conserved by ICA. And just to say that as conservators and the staff of ICA, we work to preserve public monuments and art and works that are also privately owned, because we know that they're destined for public collections ultimately. We do constantly think of the big stories that these monuments represent, but we also very earnestly honor and respect all the little stories that they embody as well, even the ones that evolve over time. And Kathy and I started talking about this in the green room, and I hope in our conversation we can talk about this some more. But this particular sculpture started out as a commission by a corporation, and it was commissioned in 1982. It was fabricated in 1986. The corporation, Amoco, sold out to BP, British Petroleum, and British Petroleum didn't want anything to do with free stamp. So for years, it languished here and there and was finally installed in Willard Park, adjacent to Cleveland City Hall. And in 1991, ICA conserved it in consultation with the artist. So is it a monument of corporate power? Is it a monument of the transfer of corporate ownership of what we consider public resources? Is it a monument to the advocacy of Cleveland's arts community for keeping it in Cleveland and finding it a new home? Is it an advocate, or is it a monument to bureaucratic freebies? Which is what I asked everyone I could find when I was asked to come here today. And now, what the free meant on free stamp. And they all think it means without cost. Is this a monument to freedom from bureaucracy, which you may find in some of the artists' quotes? Is it a monument to City Hall? Is it a monument to the people of Cleveland? Is it a monument to a really great work of art? And my answer to all of that is yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My talk is going to be a little bit different, but I can say that there is a common theme that runs through it. You'll see in a second. But I'm Julian Rogers. I'm the Executive Director for Local Government and Community Relations at Case Western Reserve University. And I have the fortunate opportunity to be able to engage with community residents on a regular basis as part of my job. And so I want to talk a little bit about, so here's the common theme. Is it coming up? There we go. So you'll see the turning point pictures in all three of our presentations. So the picture above here is from an event that we hosted a couple of years ago called the Campus and Community Playdate. And it was a day-long festival held here right outside at East Bell Commons. And the event was planned by a group of local residents, Case faculty, students, and staff, and stakeholders from various University Circle institutions. So this planning group, which referred to itself as the Welcoming Campus Working Group, was charged to identify programs and activities that could make the Case Western Reserve campus a much more welcoming place and help improve relations between the campus and its surrounding neighborhoods. So this group met over the course of a year and actually came up with a number of different activities and ideas of what to do and how do we better build relationships with one another. You know, and as we met over that time period, trust was beginning to be built, and we began to have honest conversations about some of the barriers to establishing better relationships between the neighborhoods and the campus community. What residents continued to say time and time again as we had those conversations is that there was a lack of understanding, in particular between students and Case community people, between a lack of understanding of the history of the surrounding neighborhoods to our campus. And you know, what comes from that is if you can't understand where I come from, you really can't understand me. And so there's a deep desire for having more, for having deeper understandings of where people came from and the history of these local neighborhoods. So back to the picture. So as I said, we had this campus and community play date. It was a day-long festival on East Bell. It was an opportunity to bring students and neighborhood residents together, folks from the Case community and folks from the surrounding neighborhoods. We had free food, we had live music, we had local musicians playing, we had bouncy houses for children. We actually had a wedding party come through. You know, all the weddings come through and get their pictures taken at the art museum. So they actually came through and participated, and we have pictures of them on the bouncy house. But it was a really fun event. It was held in October, and you know, October in Cleveland can be sketchy, but we lucked out. It wound up being a 70-degree day, and we had free food provided from local vendors, and it was just an overall outstanding event. But what you see going on at the turning point here is that, as I said, the residents that participated in our working group really wanted to have an opportunity to share about the community. And so what we did here at the Turning Point was to provide a storytelling area. So what you can see here is we had 3 local historians who told about, one, the history of Glenville, another about the history of Little Italy, and a third told about the history of Winston Willis, who is, you may have heard about him throughout the day, but he was one of a local property owner and business person and developer that owned a bunch of properties on 105th and Euclid here in Cleveland. And so, you know, it was fascinating to hear those stories, but it really, people, as you can see in the pictures, people were really engaged and appreciated having the opportunity to learn. And what you see in this first story is one of our historians was telling about Glenville, and the gentleman with the glasses on and the food tray is from Glenville, and so there was a lot of back and forth around what he was saying and what he knew. So that it was a good opportunity for real engagement. So we haven't been able to have this event in the past couple of years because of COVID, but it's something that we really want to do again. And of course, we will continue to have local historians telling stories about the people and the places that are around our campus. So this is a little bit different. The gentleman in the middle is Slim Parks, and this picture was taken in probably the mid-1990s, and it shows Slim, it's James E. Parks, he went by Slim. It shows him with his family and some friends, and it's taken in front of his boat at Inner City Yacht Club. And if you don't know, for those who aren't around here or even those who may be from here, Inner City Yacht Club is one of only 3 African-American yacht clubs in the entire country, and it's right here in Cleveland. If you drive down Martin Luther King Boulevard, and it dead ends at Marginal, the first marina that you see there is Inner City Yacht Club. And Slim was one of the founders of Inner City. So I mentioned that there are 3, the ones in Detroit, and there's another one in Washington, D.C. But you know, he was one of the founders of the yacht club, and it's a story that I don't think not many people know about. It's, you know, if you're not into boating or if you just pass the place on a regular basis, you wouldn't necessarily know the history and all the things that went into having an African-American yacht club here in Cleveland, and why do we need an African-American yacht club? I mean, if you think about some of the reasons why we have historically black colleges and universities, it's similar to that. Here in Cleveland, African-American boaters were not allowed to dock their boats at any of the marinas or yacht clubs in Cleveland. So all of the members of what became Inner City Yacht Club actually had to dock their boats in Sandusky, Ohio, in order to keep their boat on the water. They also had to gas up in Sandusky because none of the gas stations locally in the Cleveland area of Lake Erie would allow blacks to put gas in their boat. So it was a challenge for folks that lived in Cleveland that were interested in boating and that were black. And so Slim was, like I said, one of the founders, and his role in this was that he, the small clubhouse that's on the property, which is kind of the bathhouse now, was about to be torn down. This is when they were still negotiating with the state on acquiring the property for them, and the bulldozers were right there to tear this building down, and Slim blocked the bulldozers with his car and made sure that they did not tear down what would be their clubhouse. Eventually, in 1968, the state granted their articles of incorporation, and they were given a 99-year lease to the property that they have right now, Inner City Yacht Club. So if you drive down there, you will see that the section of North Marginal Road between Martin Luther King Boulevard and East 72nd Street is now named the James E. Slim Parks Sr. Way. And there's a picture of him on the street sign on both sides of the street. And it really got me thinking, because there are lots of signs like this all throughout Cleveland where you see a picture of someone, you have their name, and you see the street is dedicated in their honor, but you really don't know who that person is or why the street was named after them. I contacted a friend at the city and asked, I said, is there a place at the city where all of this information is archived on all the people who have streets that we can find out about all of these people, and it does not exist. I was part of the process of getting the street named after Slim, and so I understand it's about identifying a city council person that's willing to go through this and submitting some documentation. But other than that, it's not collected in any one place. So I'm just wondering, how many other people are curious as I am about who are these other people? And so I think we've got a good project. I'm thinking it could be called The Streets of Cleveland. And we can identify all of these people that obviously did something great, like Slim Parks, and have them truly recognized and archived in a way that everybody can enjoy the stories about their lives.
Wonderful. First of all, I would like to actually thank all three of the panelists for their wonderful presentations. Listening to all of you, and it was just such a wonderful progression from sort of the collective to the individual. It sort of reminds me of something that the great historian of pre-Columbian art, George Kubler, said. He once described an art object or any historical object as a bundle of durations. And I sort of I'm beginning to sort of see an object, whether it's an art object or a space, or perhaps a happening, as a bundle of stories, right? Histories or stories that people bring in. And oftentimes these stories do get recorded. They do actually leave traces, but then, just like memory, we forget things, we bring them back. Sometimes these memories have to be worked out, teased out, and I think that sort of, brings us back to your amazing idea about how there are already these small but significant sort of, signs and commemorative sort of sites for people who lived in the city and made the city, more open and more interesting and more vivacious. So I think we're really sort of thinking about sort of the ways in which we're, on the one hand, making sure to bring out some of the stories that have not been told, have not been circulated, and then also the stories that have been recorded, they have traces, but how to then bring as many people as possible into awareness of these, right? And I think that's a big challenge that anyone who's civically minded, who's interested in museums or monuments or community relations will sort of have to think about. So that leads me to the first question, which in many ways, Julian sort of already answered in a perfect and in such a robust way. So I kind of want to hear a little bit more from Kathy and Julie. You have also worked with a lot of different groups of individuals, communities. Your work is by, definition historical. So was there a particular story or a particular individual even that you really wanted to incorporate into any specific project that you worked on and somehow couldn't manage to incorporate for various reasons? I know it's a tough question, but if you can think of an example, I would love to hear.
Well, I can think of one. The immediate area around the museum, 105th, East 105th, even when I moved here, it was still there. Mm-hmm. And there were still the theaters, and they were sort of coming down one by one, and Vels was still there, and there was a lot there. And the deeper, we get back into that, I keep thinking of all the people who lived in this area when it was a much fuller residential area, and there were the jazz clubs that were referenced that everybody played at, and you know, I feel like you're kind of crossing the border between Lost Cleveland, like, oh, that's Lost Cleveland, and is there something, and is there a reason, and does it inspire us to go back and say, here's what used to be here? One event that, well, I cannot drive around Cedar or around the 100th or 89th without thinking about Jesse Owens as a kid running around. And I don't know if he did run around. I don't know if that was like the smart thing to do, or if he just ran to the track at the various schools. But I feel like, wow, we have one of the greatest athletes that ever lived that was right here. And there's a kind of nice sculpture that's not very Jesse Owens, like downtown in Huntington Park. And I feel like Jesse Owens should be much more present here. Harrison Dillard, another Olympian, I am picking Olympians, and a woman, Madeline Manning Mims, who was part of the 1968 track team. She ran track at John Hay. She was part of that team with the human rights salute at the Mexico City Games. I would love to honor those people kind of running around. And they were hurdlers, they overcame obstacles. I think there's kind of a wonderful way to do that. I also think that the moment in 1967, which was the kind of a civil rights summit, which occurred at 10515 Euclid. I mean to go look at see if this building's still here. But at the time, it was the Negro Industrial Economic Union. And here is where a number of professional athletes and civil rights leaders came to counsel Cassius Clay about his determination not to go fight in Vietnam, on his becoming a conscientious objector. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, then as Lou Alcindor, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, everybody was there. Like, is this a part of our history? It's just down the street. So I feel like combing some of that information, it would make such a richer experience, especially now as our campus expands to the clinic campus. And we all may be walking by these sites on a much more regular basis. I'd love to see something like that.
Okay. Julie, you have any?
You know what? A lot of people come to ICA that can't afford the services that they need. And we do as much as we can, as often as we can. But there are collections that we would love to have provided more care for than we could. One of them is the collection of the East Cleveland Public Library. It's called the Ichabod Llewellyn Collection. He dreamt of building an African-American museum for Cleveland. And so he collected many materials relating to that early history. And we were able to help them apply for grant funding to take care of the collection, but they weren't awarded the grant. And a lot of the institutions that we work for are small. They don't have a history of successful funding applications, and so it's very difficult for them to get resources to take care of their collection. We recently met with someone who knows the history of Cleveland's burlesque scene, and we're not able to really help them with what they needed. We rehoused their objects for them and gave them as much advice as we could. And then we also have a few things actually in our facility that no longer have homes. We have orphans from Cleveland. One is the Lincoln High School mural by William Caruso, which is absolutely stunning. It's, I think if I remember correctly, it's 32 feet high and 21 feet wide. And it used to be in the Lincoln High School. It's beautiful. It's called The Spirit of Education. And it has within it, I have an image of it here. I should have brought a slide. But oh, yeah. It has many Cleveland landmarks in it and notable figures. We also have a few remnants from the WPA artworks that were in Valley View Housing Project that were going to go to the dump, and so we took them in at ICA. And then also, we, until fairly recently, housed the personal belongings of Victor Schreckengast, who is just an amazing figure in Cleveland history and impacted the lives of all Americans. And I know Cleveland has tried in the past to build a museum to talk about his work and his contribution to industrial design, but recently his descendants took his belongings out of Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of lost that story. And then the last one that just comes to mind, well, actually I have a personal one too, but is Rose Iron Works. And I think Victor Schreckengoss's work, Rose Iron Works, and other works in town speak to Cleveland's industrial ascendancy. And it was a hotbed of industrial design. And when you move to Cleveland as a new person, there's no way you can learn about this. And so I've just learned about it here and there from people around. And then also, as a science fiction reader, Andre Norton, Harlan Ellison, Jerry Siegel, George Alec Effinger, all really important award-winning science fiction authors are from Northeast Ohio and Cleveland. Nice. And it was hard for me to find them on the internet.
It's wonderful to hear. And Julie, you and I are going to be great friends over science fiction. We have to have a chat after this. And I kind of want to sort of turn back to Julian a little more because the story of this yacht club was so, it was fascinating to me. It was really moving in many ways. And I find it really interesting that there clearly has been moments and efforts to celebrate this in some way. And then it takes this form that somehow then gets forgotten very easily or pushed aside. Is there, do you have any sort of comments about why that may be the case and perhaps a more sustainable solution to keep the memory more alive and circulating in a much more lively manner?
Yeah. I'll have to think about the sustainability of it. But I can say, when I think of there were 37 people that were credited with creating the yacht club. Slim was one, and he gets the notoriety because of what he did with the car and blocking the bulldozer. But if you look at those 37 people, among them were lawyers, doctors, teachers, business owners. What's unique about Slim was he was a numbers runner. his history was kind of running around with gangster types. He was a gentle man, and he was one of my father's best friends, and I grew up with him. But his history is not the type of history that normally is celebrated. And so I wonder, when you think about, when you list that cast of characters together, normally you wouldn't have those folks in the same room. But when you're segregated, you all have to come together. If you have a little bit of means in order to afford a boat, you're going to have to take this person with that person as you all come together. So I think about, often that folks may not had a position that held them in the highest esteem, but they may have done something great, and just because of their position, they're no longer recognized or held in history because of that one thing that people don't necessarily see as a good thing. So I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of these local heroes for one reason or another. As far as sustainability, it's the type of thing that we have to come together as a community and recognize and first find these stories. And then once they're found, figure out ways that we could somehow celebrate these. And it doesn't have to be permanent structures like monuments or street signs for that matter, but some type of public displays. It could be celebrations, parties, events where you're celebrating folks. I could see a Cleveland lost person's holiday, or something where we're having an opportunity for people to come forward with their thoughts on people that we should know about in Cleveland and people that should be recognized.
They're unsung heroes.
Unsung heroes.
Well, and it's a story, and nobody's perfect.
Right.
So, I mean, we could probably go around to every monument that's within a mile of here and say, this was the great thing the person did, and then there was this other stuff that happened, and, we're all people, so.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and the question was asked at the last session about the idea of, how do you feel about tearing down monuments of people that in this day and age we don't feel that they should be recognized. But I'm kind of the view that, well, we've got this monument here, why don't we just tell the full story about this person? And say, okay, I can see you're replacing the panel, and instead of saying this great person did this, you can say this son of a bitch did this, and that. And so, but so you're not necessarily getting rid of everything, but you're telling the full story, because now when they're removed, to some extent, it's like it never happened, the bad things they did. And so is that a good thing too?
One of my favorite things and I don't know how I even found this, was after the Spy Museum opened, I was reading more about the Cambridge spies. There was the first man, the second man, the third man. Oh no, now there's the fourth man. And remember, one was Anthony Blunt, the Queen's curator of pictures, and it was like dagger to the heart. This was so bad. And the fifth one was a man named John Cairncross, and he taught here. He taught here. He taught Romance languages. Is this great? I don't know, maybe not, but I love it as a story. And he had sort of eluded detection, and then somebody went deeper into it, and the word was transferred to him that it might be good too. He lived at the Commodore Hotel. I mean, it's like I would love to know anything more about John Cairncross, if anyone knew him. But I mean, there are just these quirks of history of somebody coming through who, there's a story. I mean, there's like a life lesson or something of how a slippery slope can be in life, and how a philosophy or whatever can go too far, according to some. He's a hero some places. But I
know that we're slightly running short on time, but I do want to sort of briefly go back to the wonderful notion of local heroes, because I think when it comes to certain types of individuals who make impacts in a smaller sort of communal level, whether within a family, whether within a sort of small group of families, within a small neighborhood, I think it's really easy to think of that as something smaller or something not as significant as a national hero. But I think when we actually begin to think about the impact that this individual might have had onto their family members, their community members, the magnitude can be just as impactful, just as great. And I think in many ways, one particular sort of challenge for all of us is to really think about then how to make that impact, right, relevant to all of us, to as many people as possible, in the way that Slim might have, sort of touched and really sort of transformed the lives, and then also sort of the way that this particular community came together. I think it can also inspire other people, other groups in an equally analogously impactful way. So I think that is something, I think, a great lesson that I get to take from chatting with all of you. And I would like to thank you again for your wonderful presentations and your input. So I would like to actually now open up the floor for some questions. We do have a few minutes before we conclude this panel.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I too enjoyed the Slim story, and it reminded me when I attended law school here of my friend from Boston whose ancestor had fought in the Civil War. And his family had obviously lived here for a very long time. And at one point, they named a street after his ancestor. And I asked him once when I was in Boston to show me the street, and he said, well, they took down the sign to do some work on the street, and they never put the sign back up. So please make your directory so we don't forget Slim.
Wonderful. Well, I think it's a good reminder that, I think we often talk about memory as if it can exist on its own. But just as we have to keep remembering, right? It takes work to remember it, and I think that work is where we come in, right? As those in the arts, those in community services and education, I think an important aspect is to how to come up with a sustainable and effective way of keeping up memories and expand that a little, right? So yes, we have another question.
To Kathy's point. I've been told that as you go down Euclid Avenue to the east, past Mayfield, under the rapid tracks, there's a discount gas station on the north side. And that was the train stop where Jesse Owens got off returning from the Berlin Olympics to come back home. Wow. Yeah, there's no plaque there. And again, it's just a discount gas station, but that was the station. The other thing too, that group you talked with, Cassius Clay, there's a wonderful photograph of that group. And John Wooten, who was an offensive lineman, became a very, very strong activist when he retired from the Browns. It was really a big part of putting that together, too. So.
Yeah, thank you. There are wonderful pictures of Jesse at the station being mobbed, and in a good way. And the car parade, just a kind of, I think, spontaneous thing through the neighborhoods back to his house. They're wonderful.
A comment. So many of us live in our phones. It seems like the geographical association of these people, if we could get onto Google Maps and have pins dropped, and when you go to someplace and you get a direction, it tells you about these people who came up along the way, and it embedded the local history into the sort of metadata for geography, that would be, at least for now, a very long-lasting way that wouldn't be dependent on road construction.
Yeah, that's great.
That's amazing. Great.
Does anybody on the panel know who the Wild Wild West show star is, who's buried in the East Cleveland Cemetery that's just east of campus? The original East Cleveland Cemetery.
I know where it is.
At one time, I knew who was buried there, and now I can't remember, and I, Googled a bunch of guys like Wild Bill Hickok, but nobody seems to be buried in Cleveland.
We'll look into that.
Yeah, we'll look into that. Any other?
Charles, I had a thought based on what you just
Yeah, of
said
course,
and what
please.
everyone said, is that we already have monuments in Cleveland. If we could find a way to tell all the stories, the clusters of stories that are associated with the monuments we already have, I think that would be fantastic too, because I see a lot of public art in Cleveland is not being very well maintained, and some of it may get to the point where it can't be out anymore, can't be functional anymore. So if we could take advantage of the built environment we already have, in addition to adding new stories, I think that would be great.
Oh, that's such a wonderful way to conclude our panel. So I would like to thank again to all the panelists. And thank you everyone for joining our conversation. Thank you.